thank you all for coming. I see that I have a good group of people. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Jorge Tamayo. I have been working for Berlitz for 6 years now. And tonight I would like to share this presentation about presentations. And in these presentations, we'll be answering some common questions that a lot of students have asked me over these years. If you're here, it probably means that you guys have to deliver presentations in English. And if you're here, it means that you probably worry about your presentations in English. So the goal of today's presentation is to go over some of the key aspects that you'll have to
Jorge, ¿puedes activar tu audio, por favor?
yeah,
Por error
okay.
de silencio.
All right, sorry. So let me just start with the agenda. And well, this is my agenda. You can read this cartoon. I'll read it for you. For this 1 hour meeting, I have made a presentation with 210 slides. Each slide is filled with paragraphs of text, and I will now read each paragraph, word for word. Does that seem like a good agenda for you guys? Probably not, right? So we all know that this is a big no-no. We shouldn't be hiding behind a PowerPoint, and we shouldn't be reading throughout our presentation, right? So that will probably answer one of the most common questions that a lot of students have asked me over time. Because it's one of the most common questions to say, hey, does it make sense for me to write down everything in English, then like memorize that and spit it out during my presentation? Probably not. It will seem like this. So let's take a look at how you can make your presentation way more interesting for your audience. So this is my real agenda. My real agenda has 3 points. Today, we will first talk about adapting your presentation to English. Okay. Our second point will be to adapt your presentation to the culture, both to the country's culture and the company's culture. And our third point here will be to adapt the register of your presentation, right? Now we're going to start with adapting to English. And this is really a fundamental aspect of the process of adapting your presentation. Now, I know that here we have people from Peru, we have people from Argentina, we have people from Uruguay, people from Venezuela, and you all present in Spanish. That means that you probably prepared your presentations in Spanish. But then when it comes to the moment of transitioning to English, adapting that presentation to English, there are some common traps that we need to avoid. The first trap that we need to avoid has to do with speed. And here, I'd like to share this study that was conducted not that long ago in 2020 regarding language. So this might seem like a complicated study and a complicated table, but let me break it down for you guys. Take a look at Spanish, right, on the left column. As you can see, Spanish is one of the fastest languages. One of the fastest languages, almost 12 or 14, almost 10 syllables per second, right? So it's very fast. It's a very fast language, right? And if you compare that to English, that is over here, we have a big difference. Spanish is here, English is here. So that is the first thing that we need to accept about this language. It's slower, right? So you cannot expect to speak as fast as you do in Spanish. It just doesn't make sense, you know? So that is one of the first aspects that you need to consider when adapting your presentation to English. You'll probably not be as fast as in Spanish when it comes to speaking. However, there's something else. As you can see on the right column, the fact that English is a slow language doesn't mean that information is not conveyed properly or effectively. Quite the contrary. If you see over here, English has one of the highest information transfer rate. That means that in spite of being a slow language, information is conveyed at a much faster rate than in Spanish. To put this in another way, um, in Spanish, you will need to use a lot of words to say a simple thing. Whereas in English, you'll use much fewer words to say the same. That is something that I need you guys to understand, because if you want to adapt your presentation, you will need to accept this fundamental principle of English. It's going to be slower and it's going to be efficient. That's what we want. Right? Now, in order to make it efficient, there's one rule that I can highly recommend to you guys. And this rule is called the KISS rule. Not like KISS the group, but the KISS rule. So the KISS rule stands for keep it short and simple. Keep it short and simple, guys. And I'll tell you an anecdote. A couple of years ago, we had this very interesting meeting with the vice president of a multinational company that is in the business of building antennas and renting them to telecommunication companies. This guy was the global vice president of this multinational company, and he was looking for a program to crisp his top executives' English skills. Now, according to him, members of the board had complained about Latin American pronunciation. In this meeting, he explained that the members of the board were disturbed by the way top Latin American executives presented and pronounced words. This seemed a little bit odd to me, and this seemed like an excuse, like a tactful way of pointing out a problem. So we eventually had some assessments with these top executives that had to present to the members of the board. These guys were like very sharp executives from Argentina, from Brazil, from Colombia, from Peru. And we realized that the problem wasn't pronunciation. The problem was that they made very long sentences, very long sentences. And they would say those sentences really fast. To be honest, it was even difficult for us to correct them because it was overwhelming. It was like, what are you saying? Calm down, because we don't get you. And that's exactly what the problem was. And that was disturbing for the members of the board in the US, right? So the KISS rule was eventually the tool that allowed them to communicate effectively with the members of the board, right? So how does this work? Let me give you an example. Here we have a very long sentence, the kind of sentence that a lot of students dream of saying because they think, I say this kind of sentences in Spanish, so it makes sense to say them in English. Well, no, they might sound cool, but they're actually confusing for your audience. So please Don't say things like, the diverse range of products and services offered by our company represents a comprehensive solution that is designed to cater to the unique and evolving needs of our broad customer base, which spans multiple industries and market segments. Whew, that's too long, right? Don't say that. Keep it short and simple. And as you can see, we can make it as short and as simple and as concrete as and efficient as this. Our company offers a wide range of products and services to meet our customers' needs. That is that, right? No fancy words, no fancy structures, no fancy connectors. A simple and efficient message will do, right? So, in order to make it short and simple, here are some tips. Avoid using two or more actions. I'll give you an example. It is common in some students say things like, uh, we need to arrange the time of a meeting so that we can meet, right? Something like that. And that, of course, is way too complicated. Go for one simple action. Always look for one simple action and structure your sentence around that simple action. Say something like, we need to schedule a meeting, right? So that's one of the keys of the keys rule. Looking for the right action to build your sentence around it, right? To put it another way, your sentences should be as simple as subject, action, something. That's it. No need for more, right? Let me give you another example. Here we have another terribly long sentence that we don't want to use in our presentations. Please don't say things like, it is of the utmost importance that presenters make a concerted effort to avoid the utilization of overly complex sentence structures and linguistic devices that may serve to obfuscate the central message that is intended to be conveyed to the audience. Please don't say that. And say something short like, avoid complex sentences that may confuse the audience, right? There is another advantage to this. Your audience might not be homogeneous, just like my audience today. I don't know much about your English knowledge. I presume that some of you might have a stronger level than others, but I don't know much about who my audience is tonight, right? However, I presume that you guys will have that advantage because probably for your presentations, you will know who is in the audience. And if you know who is in the audience, then you'll be able to adapt your language to your audience, right? And this, of course, has to do with this, right? Now, that is the first step, adapting to English. Speaking slowly, because again, English is a slow language. Sharing short and simple sentences, building your sentences around one action, and of course, adapting your presentation to your audience in terms of English knowledge, right? That is going to be the first part. Now, a second point that we also should take into account is the culture, right? So when we talk about culture, we talk about many elements. Uh, we could talk about national countries. We should talk about um, organizational culture, right? And of course, these are all elements that will have a great effect on your presentation. Let me show you this. So there are several theories that have been discussed by human resources specialists, by sociologists, by economists alike, and by linguistics as well. And one of them is the low context, high context culture theory, right? So according to this, there are some cultures that need a lot of context. Think about Peru. I don't know how many of you live in Peru or are Peruvians, but I do know, because I lived in Peru for 7 years, that Peruvians tend to talk around the point. They don't tend to say things in a straightforward manner. They always, find a way to make it complicated, right? That's a very Peruvian thing. And that's part of their culture, and it's perfectly fine. But if you are going to present to a different culture, then maybe that's one of the things you should modify in your message, right? If you do realize that in your presentations you tend to talk around the point, then one idea would be to be more straightforward, right? This, of course, would make a great difference if you are presenting to, let's say, Americans or Europeans colleagues who tend to be more low context. They say things in a straightforward manner and they appreciate that honesty, right? So that's one aspect you could take into account. Something that you could also take into account, and this has to do with professional biases, is the difference between application first and principles first. So think about your bosses. Um, when you present an idea to your boss, does your boss ask you questions about how you're going to do it? Or does he or she ask question about the why? The what are we going to do with that? Right? This is the key difference between application first and principle first. There are some people uh, who tend to focus on the application. So, like, if we implement this, if we do this project, what will we achieve? What are we going to do with that new tool, right? That's application first. And if you know that your audience is more interested in applications, then you should focus on that, right? And you should adapt your presentation to applications of whatever idea you are presenting, right? Now, there are some other bosses that are more into the rational aspect of it, right? I remember a marketing director who told me once that the CEO of her company would always bring a calculator, a calculator to their meetings, and he would double check every single figure of her presentation. He would double check it with his calculator. And that's a great example of someone who is undecided, principles first, right? So these are rational people who want to understand why or how things are done before thinking about what will be achieved with that, right? So if you know that your audience tends to focus on that, give them that, right? Adapt your presentation to the technical side of it, to the reasoning behind it, right? Now, of course, another theory that is rather important in the human resources field is the one that was presented in 1999 by Professors Cameron and Quinn. In that year, Professors Cameron and Quinn published a book that was called Diagnosing and Changing Organizational Culture based on the Competing Values Framework, right? Now, you might know this theory just as the Competing Values Framework theory. And if you don't know it by that name and you work in the human resources field, then probably you have seen something like this, right? According to this theory, organizational cultures can be categorized in one of these big four, right? And believe it or not, the book that was published in 1999 is still pretty much discussed and taught in universities around the world. So let's take a look at how these four categories can help us adapt our presentation, right? So let's first present the different kind of organizational cultures that we might face. The first one is the hierarchy one, right? And here I want you to think about a very bureaucratic, hierarchical organization. Of course, it could be the army, right? I don't know if someone here is from the Navy or something like that. Um, you guys are great, but you know that it's very hierarchical, right? So in that kind of organizations, hierarchy has a key role, right? And if you want to persuade your audience of doing something, you might want to take that into account. You might want to focus on the hierarchical structure of the company and frame your arguments in a way that makes sense for that hierarchical organization. Here are some tips. You could reinforce the standard procedures, right? Because if it's hierarchical, it's bureaucratic. And if it's bureaucratic, it means that they have very well established procedures. So you might want to build on that, right? You might want to use a lot of quotes from experts just to, give credibility to your ideas. You might want to focus on highlighting the credentials of your team, experience, the expertise that you have in the field, because again, that's what matters the most for them, right? And you might, of course, want to be more formal with them, right? That is for hierarchical structures, right? Call it the Navy, call it the big bank, right? Those old organizations that are very hierarchical and very bureaucratic, right? Now, another kind of organization might be the clan one. And this one is more for, those companies that are run by families, right? Think about those small to medium-sized companies owned by families in which everyone in the family has a role to play, right? So the logic behind those organizations is, of course, different because there are very strong links between team members. They are not only colleagues, they are also family, right? And that means that not only should you respect that, but you should also build on that. So some ideas that you might use with the clan culture, you might want to engage in friendly conversations with everyone, right? These are usually not large structures, so you can get to meet a lot of members of the team, which are like a lot of members of the family. You might want to focus on collaborative efforts. You might want to get everyone involved in your project or your idea so that everyone has skin in the game, you know? And of course, you want to give them time to ask the questions and you want to give everyone a place in the process of whatever idea you're proposing, right? So that's something you should take into account with clans, right? Then, of course, we have another category, one that is very different, adulteracy, right? Now, if someone here is a lawyer, probably we have a lawyer over here. Um, if there is a lawyer here, then I know that you know what ad hoc is, right? So Usually lawyers have this kind of figures of ad hoc judges whenever a judge is like recused by someone, then you know you have ad hoc judges. And here adhocracy has something to do with it. Because think about startups. In a startup, you don't have well-defined positions, you don't have well-defined responsibilities, and you have people that are constantly multitasking, right? It's something very, let's say, special, right? And that means that when you are presenting to an organization with that kind of culture, you don't want to rely on positions because positions don't mean that much for them, right? These are flexible positions. So what you want to do with this kind of organizations, what you want to do with this kind of startups, when you have to present to them, when you have to convince them, persuade them of something, then you might want to focus on innovation. You might want to focus on creativity, right? You might want to frame your arguments in a way that they seem innovative and risky, right? That will also go along with visuals, right? This is a fast-paced environment. Usually startups are running, running, constantly running. So you might want to use videos or medias that allow you to have very fast-paced presentations, right? And of course, you might want to have a Q&A in which everyone can brainstorm ideas, right? Again, the idea is to get them involved with your idea, get them involved with your presentation, and have them innovate with it, right? That is an approach. That is one way in which you can adapt your presentation to this kind of organization. And then the last one that we have is the market. Market organizations, these are probably the most common ones. These are the companies, the organizations that are focused on numbers, right? Um, I can bet that we have over here someone in the commercial department of a large company. And if that is the case, then I know you know that is stressful. It's a stressful. You're only trying to meet your quotas, constantly trying to meet your quotas. You need numbers, you need market share, right? And that means that your KPIs are going to determine the way we adapt our presentation, right? So if we are presenting to a structure that has a market culture, we need to focus on numbers, KPIs, market share, right? We need to focus on productivity. We need to focus on how our idea, our presentation, our project is going to increase those KPIs. So present your arguments based on that, right? That is another aspect that you should take into account when adapting to the culture. Now, again, this is not entirely black or white. You might have a company that has a bit of hierarchy and a bit of market structure, right? You might have one that has a bit of clan and a bit of democracy, right? So it will be up to you to ask the right questions, to know the company, to know your audience, and to adapt accordingly. If you are presenting to colleagues from another country, then you already know how your organization is. You already know what your KPIs are, and you already know what they expect. So just use that in your favor, okay? Now, the third element that we should take into account is adapting the register, right? Um, Now, I'm going to start by sharing an anecdote here, because for those of you who live in Peru, I'm sure you've heard about Breca, the group, right? A big holding. Some of you might even work for Breca, right? And this very large, for those of you who don't live in Peru, this very large holding that has a bunch of business units in very different areas has one innovation hub. And this innovation hub, we were lucky enough to teach them, and I'm saying we were lucky enough because they were brilliant, really brilliant people with very creative, very innovative ideas. It was fascinating to have class with them, and um, and I remember going to their offices, and the first thing that you saw when you got into the office was a big inflatable unicorn, a big inflatable unicorn. So back then, this was before the pandemic, we were forced to wear a tie, a suit, because, back then that was the rule of thumb. And and so it was very weird because every time I went there, they would look at me with this, like face like, hmm, why are you wearing that? Everyone was wearing a t-shirt and sneakers, and everyone was super informal. And that was how they were. That's the kind of organization that they had, right? So if you're going to adapt your presentation, make sure to adapt the formality levels of your presentation. And that means adapting your language. So how can we be more or less formal in English? Well, here I have some tips. Um, One thing that we can do in order to be more formal is to avoid the use of contractions, right? So, of course, we have a bunch of them in English, right? I'm not, I'll go, um, I've been there, right? All of those contractions are great, but if you want to be more formal, you should avoid them. That's one aspect. Think about a formal report. In a formal report, in a formal email, you're not going to use contraction. You're going to use full words, no contractions. Now, a second aspect to make your presentation more formal is the use of words. What words are you going to choose? So remember that English has different roots. It has very strong French roots, Latin, French roots, and it has Germanic roots, right? So there's a historical reason behind this. Um, in the 11th century, a French duke, William the Conqueror, invaded England and conquered it, and he became the king of England. So that meant that for many centuries, the king and English nobles spoke French. And that's why a lot of fancy words in English are actually French words. French words. Like not even adapted, French words. Right? So to give you an example, if we talk about Bill Gates, Mr. Bill Gates, right? Talk about that guy, not that Gates, that guy. If you talk about that guy, well, he probably doesn't have a house. No, Bill Gates doesn't have a house. Bill Gates has a residence, French word. And when he invites his friends over, he doesn't serve snacks. That's for random people. That's for common Joes like you and I. No, Bill Gates serves canapés, French word. And Bill Gates doesn't have a driver. He has a chauffeur. Now, I challenge you guys to take a look at the formal documents in English that you might have in your emails. And I challenge you to find French words. You'll see that in most of those formal documents, there will be French words. I guarantee French words. So if you want to sound fancy, elegant, formal in your presentation, try to use French words, right? On the contrary, if you to be more informal, go for Germanic words, go for phrasal verbs, right? That's going to make it more informal, right? Now, another element that you might use, and this doesn't necessarily go against the KISS rule, is the use of long noun phrases. What do I mean by this? Let me give you an example. You could say, the difficulty of complying with the regulation was due to whatever, something, right? Like Mike or whatever, you name it, right? So the first part, the difficulty of complying with the regulation, that whole thing is actually the beginning of your sentence and the subject of your sentence, right? That's what I mean by long noun phrases. It's the kind of phrases that lawyers use in their contracts, right? Long noun phrases. So if you want to be more formal, that's one thing you could use. But that doesn't mean making super long sentences. You see the difference? And of course, we have short noun phrases. An example of short noun phrases is Mike went to the supermarket. Mike, that's it, right? Or it was difficult to achieve. It, that's a short noun phrase. That's it, right? Okay, now another element that is also important is the use of passive voice versus active voice. When you want to be more formal, passive voice is of the essence. That means focusing on the results rather than on who's doing the action. To give you an example, think about politicians. Instead of saying, I don't know, instead of saying, I don't know, the economy was, instead of saying I affected the economy, right, which is something that a lot of politicians should say, instead of saying I affected the economy, they're going to say something like economy was affected. Economy was affected. By whom? I don't know. Not me. Wasn't me, right? Economy was affected. That is passive voice. You focus on the result, and by doing that, you are more formal, right? Active voice is going to be something more personal, and it's going to give you accountability as well, which is also good if you're dealing with customers, if you're in customer service, definitely use active voice, right? Like, I will take care of this, I will do it, right? That's active voice, right? But again, review the formal documents in English that you have in your emails, and you'll see that there's a lot of passive voice. A lot of economy was affected, right? And then, of course, something else that will make your presentation more or less formal is the use of connectors. You have very fancy connectors that lawyers love, lawyers and bankers. Um, I have nothing against lawyers. By the way, I am a lawyer. I don't have anything against lawyers. Just, just to clarify that. And some fancy connectors like notwithstanding, right? This is as fancy as it gets. So instead of saying but, which is like a simple way to talk about a contradiction, you're going to say notwithstanding. Long word, formal word, right? Instead of saying so to talk about a consequence, you're going to go for therefore or henceforth, right? Or as a result, right? So long connectors, formal connectors. That's like the link that we can establish here. Long connectors, formal connectors, right? And if you want to sound more informal, go for short connectors. So, well, anyway, right? Short connectors, okay? And, but, right? So, by taking into account these different elements, you can adapt the register of your presentation to your audience. If you know that you are presenting to, let's say, a hierarchical company, you want to be more formal, are you going to use full words, French words, passive voice, long noun phrases, and long connectors, right? If, on the other hand, you're presenting to an adocracy kind of organization, then you want to be informal. Use contractions, Germanic words, phrasal verbs, short noun phrases, active voice, and a lot of short connectors. That's how you can do it. And that's how I'm sure you'll be able to adapt your language, the language of your presentation, to your audience. Okay? All right. So we have talked about adapting to English. We have talked about adapting to the culture. And we have talked about adapting the register, right? So now I want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions, right? Um, and I'm going to start by asking a question to all of you. Do you think that you should translate all your presentation from Spanish to English, memorize it, and then spit it out to your audience? Does that seem like a good idea? I don't know. There you go. Romina said no. I agree with you, Romina. Valerie said no. I agree with you. Please don't do that. It's one of the most common questions. Please don't. Now, guys, do you have any question regarding this topic of adapting your presentation to English? The mic is yours. What questions do we have? And while you think about your questions, I'm going to leave this great news for Peru because we have a special offer uh, just for today, I think, for today and tomorrow. I'm sure. Yeah, today and tomorrow, or just today. I'm not quite sure. So if you are in Peru and you are interested, I have to tell you, it's time to act because there is a very special offer. If you are in another country, like in Uruguay or Venezuela, it's also time to act. I don't know what offer they have, but I'm sure they have good offers. So you have the details to contact Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Now let's see what questions we have. What questions do we have? Let's see. Uh, Any question? No? There you go. So Romina has a question. Um, yeah, okay. So what's the difference between long noun phrases versus short noun phrases? Great question, Romina. So let me write down here a sentence. Going to tuck, put it over here. That's probably a good idea. Okay. So look at this. Um, okay. You could say, for instance, the reason why we couldn't complete the project is, I don't know, is the weather. Okay. So if you take a look at that, we could say that the reason why we couldn't complete the project can be replaced by the reason, just the reason. The reason is the weather, right? We can say the reason is the weather, but we are saying the reason why we couldn't complete the project. You see, this whole thing, the reason why we couldn't project the project, is a long noun. It's a unit. It can be replaced by the reason, the whole thing, right? So whenever you have those very long nouns at the beginning of your sentence, then we call that a long noun phrase, right? You could double check this in a very easy way. you could take your sentence and try to replace the beginning for just one word. If it works, it means that it's a long noun phrase. Okay? Let me give you another example. Okay, so the delay in the payment was due to our CFO's accident, right? Those of you who work in accounting, you know that if the CFO has an accident, payments will be delayed, right? So, in this sentence, we could say it was due to our CFO's accident. We can replace the delay in the payment, the whole thing, for it. This is another example of a long noun phrase. We have a bunch of words that can be replaced by just one. It, right? It was due to our CFO's accident, right? So let me double check this, Romina. Is this clear for you now? Awesome. Perfect. Okay, do we have any other question? The mic is yours. No questions? Okay, so then in that
Hi.
case, oh yeah,
Hi,
I
this
hear
is
you.
Melissa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yes.
do
Hi,
have a
Melissa.
question. Hi.
Sure.
Well, I was in a meeting, and my
Mhm.
question is just basic. It's like, how do I say, I have no idea what are you asking in a polite, not to to look so dumb way? I was in a meeting. I have to be with a tech guy, and the
Mhm.
tech guy couldn't go. So I was like, okay, any tech questions I won't be able to answer, but I still have to present to this customer. So what would be the best way to answer in this case?
That is a great question, Melissa. Great question. So, how can we clarify? How can we ask our audience to rephrase their questions, right? Without looking completely lost. I have to say, you were very brave, Melissa, because that sounds like a horrible, dreadful situation. Right? And next time you could say something like this. You could say, I'm sorry, could you please clarify this? Could you please explain what you mean by this? I'm not sure I quite following you. Could you please give me an example? You see? So when you say things like that, you'll be conveying the message that you are not fully understanding or that you probably don't understand, but in a tactful way, right? So saying something like, not quite sure I follow you. Can you please give me an example? What do you mean by this? Right? You could also rephrase by saying, so what you're saying is this, right? You could also ask echo questions like, um, I don't know, you are here for what, right? This is a bit less tactful, but it can work if you are like running against the clock, right? And of course, saying things like, well, I'm not sure I understand this word. Can you please rephrase that? That is that, right? So is that clear, Melissa?
Yes, thank you. You give me a bunch of ideas what to use next time.
Awesome, awesome. Very good question. Good luck with those tech guys. Um, those tech guys. They are great, but they are difficult, right? Now, is there any other question? No? All right. So in that case, I'll be handing the floor to Roger, who's going to give you a great surprise, guys. So, Roger,
Gracias, Jorge. Buenas noches con todos. Ahorita vamos a realizar el sorteo, así que les dejo el link para los que no han podido registrarse todavía. Ahí les voy a dejar el link y les doy un minuto para que puedan registrarse para realizar el sorteo.
While you do that, I'll leave all our contact numbers over here.
Gracias. En unos minutos estamos realizando el sorteo. Listo, chicos. Ya estoy colocando los participantes en el sorteo. Ahorita comparto mi pantalla para que puedan revisar.
Now, while Roger does that, let me just answer a very interesting question that Andy just shared on the chat. So, yes, Andy, you should definitely follow the keys rule. Keep it short and simple. Um, that doesn't mean that when you want to be more formal, you cannot use long noun phrases. Um, these are going to be slightly longer sentences. You're right about that. But the essence of the keys rule prevails. What do I mean by this? In the keys rule, you have three elements. You have your who, your subject, you have your action, and you have your something. Regardless of the use of long noun sentences, of short or short noun sentences, you'll still have the same three elements, right? In the example I gave, this one of the examples I gave, you can see that the delay in the payment can be replaced for it. And whether we replace it for it or not, we have three elements. The delay in the payment, that's the subject of our sentence. We have the action, which is was, and we have the something due to our CFO's accident. So the essence of the keys rule is to build your sentences using only those three elements, right? That doesn't mean that you're going to have super simple sentences like I love coffee. I mean, there's nothing wrong about it, but you can have slightly longer sentences with just those three elements, right? So you can use long noun phrases without going against the keys rule, right? So very good question, Andy. Very good question. Now, Roger, are you ready?
Sí, estamos listos. Jorge, voy a compartir mi pantalla para que todos puedan ver. ¿Me confirma, Jorge, si se puede ver bien?
Perfect.
Listo, chicos. Acá están todos los participantes. Hemos filtrado por su correo, así que acá pueden ver sus correos. Estén atentos porque ahorita voy a pasar al siguiente texto para realizar el sorteo. Recuerden que esto es el sorteo para una licencia Cyber Teacher por 6 meses. Y vamos a empezar. Va a haber un ganador y son 34 participantes que se han registrado. Aquí pueden revisar sus correos. Voy a pasar rápidamente, así que atentos. Para que revisen que todos están. Y listo, voy a comenzar con el sorteo. Atentos, chicos. Y en 3 segundos saldrá el nombre. Y listo, Mariela Soria Ramírez.
Oh, súper. Aquí
All
estoy.
righty.
Here.
Perfecto,
Congratulations,
justo.
Mariela.
Thank you.
Felicitaciones, Mariela. Sí, mañana te vamos a contactar con tus datos que ya tenemos por interno para poder brindarte tu premio de la licencia Cyber Teacher por 6 meses.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Gracias a ti,
Awesome.
gracias a ti.
Awesome. So
Continúa, Jorge,
thank
por
you,
favor.
everyone. Yeah, thank you, Roger. Thank you, everyone, for connecting. You've been a great audience, and I hope that these tips will help you in your future presentations. We have a lot of programs regarding presentations, a lot of programs in which we get to work with those skills. So if you need to make a lot of presentations in English, definitely give us a call. We're here for that. Okay? So thank you all for coming, and I'll see you all in class. Okay? Have a good one. Take care.
Hasta luego. Gracias, Jorge.